Hello everyone and welcome to our newest video. Today we are going to talk about Skanderbeg, his first battles and the first siege of Kruje. Skanderbeg was born on the Kastrioti noble family whose first mention is 1368 with Kastriot of Kanina was the Kefale, Duke, of Kanina. Noel Malcolm suggests that Kastriot was previously from Kosovo and later became the Kefale of Kanina. During the late 13th century and early 14th century Gjon Kastrioti ruled the powerful Kastrioti Principality. Gjon had previously fought against the Ottomans in the Battle of Kosovo with many other Albanian nobles. In 1415 he would be forced to send his sons to the Ottoman Sultan Murad II along with Skanderbeg. Gjon Kastrioti would revolt twice and twice be defeated, whilst his sons were educated in the highest military education. Gjon Kastrioti would be granted lands in Tibur and Bulgaria where he probably got the surname Skanderbeg, which from Turkish could be translated as Lord Alexander. During the Battle of Nis, he with 300 Albanian cavalrymen would leave the Turkish camp and go to Kruje, where he secured it via a false firman. Later on Skanderbeg and other powerful Albanian lords such as Gjurg Jarianitai, Gjurg Balshaw, Nikol Kagjini, Lexaria, Theodor Korona Mazaka, Andrew Ethiopia, Stefan Kronojevic etc. would form the Leauge of Lezhe. With the creation of this alliance Skanderbeg launched his rebellion. The Ottomans would send a force under Ali Pasha which would clash at Torvioll, somewhere in modern Tibur. On the morning of 29th of June, Skanderbeg arranged his army for battle. Apart from the 3,000 warriors hidden behind the Ottoman army, Skanderbeg left another reserve force of 3,000 under the command of Ranakanti. The Albanian army was positioned in a crescent-shaped curving inwards. They were divided into three groups, each composed of 3,000 men. They were all placed at the bottom of a hill, with the intention of luring the Ottoman cavalry-based army into a downhill charge. The Albanian left wing was commanded by Tanush Thopia with 1,500 horsemen and an equal number of infantrymen. On the right wing, Skanderbeg placed Moisigilami in the same manner as Thopia. In front of the wings, foot archers were placed to lure the Ottomans in. In the center, there were 3,000 men under the command of Skanderbeg and Gjon Mazaka. 1,000 horsemen were placed in front of the main division with orders to blunt the initial Turkish cavalry charge. An equal number of archers, trained to accompany the horses, was placed next to these horsemen. The main body of infantry, commanded by Gjon Mazaka, was placed behind the archers. After the army was marshaled, Skanderbeg would not permit the trumpets to give the signal for battle until he saw Ali Pasha advancing. An Ottoman body of cavalry charged ahead of the rest, but were repulsed by the Albanians and retreated. Suspicious of a feint, Skanderbeg prevented his men from giving chase to the Turks and sent a body of horsemen to marshal his troops back to their places. The same situation occurred on the left wing and, when all were in their places, the army prepared for the main offensive. As it began, the wings were fiercely led on by Thopia and Gulami and pushed back the Ottoman wings. In the center, Skanderbeg assaulted a selected battalion. When the proper signal was given, the 3,000 horsemen hidden in the woods sprang out and charged into the Ottoman rear, causing large parts of their army to rout. The wings of the Albanian army turned towards the Ottoman center's flanks. Gjon Mazaka, having charged the Turkish center, was met by fierce resistance and the Turks continued to pour in fresh forces until Vranakanti came in with his reserves and decided the battle. The Turkish army was surrounded. The Ottoman front ranks were annihilated except for 300 soldiers. Ali Pasha's personal battalion fled although the commander nearly met his death. Between 8,000 to 22,000 Ottoman soldiers died in the battle, while 2,000 were captured. The Albanians were originally attributed to have lost as few as 120 men, but modern sources suggest a higher figure of 4,000 Albanians dead and wounded. Skanderbeg remained quiet in his camp for the remainder of that day and the following night. Having addressed his troops, he directed his infantry to mount the captured horses. The spoils of the victory were abundant and even the wounded took part in the pillaging. Skanderbeg thereafter ordered a general retreat toward Kruje. Skanderbeg's victory was praised through the rest of Europe. The European states thus began to consider a crusade to drive the Ottomans out of Europe. The other Albanian noble Gjergjarianitajan between 1431 to 1435 had already defeated the Ottomans in 5 battles. Thus Albanians were the only Europeans who had managed to defeat the Ottomans in several battles and stop their advance. When Ali Pasha returned to Adrianople, Edirne, he explained to the Sultan that the loss should be attributed to his forces and the fortunes of war and not his generalship. The Battle of Torvioll thus opened up the almost 40 years of war between Skanderbeg's Albania and the Ottoman Empire. The period between the Battle of Torvioll and the First Siege of Kruje saw the Leauge of Lezhe win its Vetrograd, Valikrad and a successful war against the Venetians. In 1450 Sultan Murad II with an army 100,000 strong to besiege Kruje. Before the siege began, Skanderbeg exited Kruje with 8,000 men, among whom were many Italians, Frenchmen, and Germans. 2,000 of these were infantry and 6,000 were cavalry. Skanderbeg found Mount Tumenishta, now known as Mount Skanderbeg, to be a suitable position from which to attack the Ottomans. Kruje was left with a garrison of 4,000 men under the command of Vrana Conti. Vrana had under his command several Germans, Italians, and Frenchmen, to whom he emphasized the importance of the siege and also ordered them to their positions. Kruje had enough supplies for a 16-month siege. The women and children of Kruje were sent for protection to Venetian-possessed cities, whereas the others were ordered to burn their crops and move into the mountains and fortresses. Murad reached Kruje on May 14 with approximately 100,000 of his best soldiers, 60,000 of which was cavalry. Murad proposed to Vrana that he should hand over the fortress, but Vrana refused. After receiving the refusal, Murad set his army to cast 10 cannons, one of which could fire rocks weighing 400 pounds and another 200 pounds. Despite the firepower, the Turkish firing positions were at a disadvantage, since Kruje was almost part of the mountain which it had been built. The cannons could fire 2 or 3 times a day and were not accurate. 2 large and 4 smaller guns were placed on the Tirana side, and the remainder were aimed at the main gateway. Murad fired on Kruje for 4 days until a breach was finally made. The Sultan believed that he had the advantage and ordered his troops through the walls. The garrison managed to push the assault back, thus gaining time to repair the walls. Murad, fearing a counterattack from Skanderbeg, sent a scouting patrol towards the surrounding mountains to watch for an attack. Skanderbeg still managed to lead, at dusk, a raid on the Turkish encampment, killing several hundred men, capturing and destroying Turkish supplies, and almost losing his own life. When Skanderbeg returned to his men, his shield was so battered that its shape was scarce to be discerned. The raid cost Skanderbeg 10 dead and even more wounded. The assault continued however, with the guns sounding from time to time. The defenders were not facing great difficulty, however. 60 of them sallied forth to do whatever damage they could, and those at the walls repelled all attempts to enter. The main weight of the attack had come from the Tirana side, where the Turkish losses had been heavy. When the second assault began, the Turks tried to break through the gate with their lances. After heavy casualties, the attackers retreated and Murad held for the next 2 days a council of all his generals. An immediate precaution was to guard the camp against another surprise attack, which was responded to by placing a force of men under the command of Prince Mehmed, where the first attack had taken place. Moisiari at Gilumai feigned an attack with about 500 horsemen. The alarm was given and the Turks prepared for his attack. Meanwhile, Skanderbeg and his forces moved around the camp and broke in where least expected. Before an organized counterattack could be made, Skanderbeg retreated from the camp. The attacks made by Skanderbeg caused the Turks to aim some of their cannons towards the expected guerrilla forces, instead of the fortress. A large force of Turkish cavalry was sent out, which Skanderbeg followed up to the mouth of the Shan River, until they turned back to Kruje. While Skanderbeg had been away, a large Ottoman assault was made on Kruje from the Tirana side, but an inadvertent friendly fire from the Turks forced them to call off the assault. The Ottomans then attempted to mine the fortress, but could not succeed, since the fortress had been built on rock. Since the food supplies were beginning to run out, The Turks received provisions from Venice, as did the Albanians. The Turkish attacks had made no headway and the Ottoman army had lost many dead or wounded, whereas Skanderbeg's force had lost 1,000 men thus far. Moiseguillamai and Tanushtopi raised a couple thousand more and the force was split between the three, making attacks on the Turkish camp easier. Skanderbeg began to move towards the camp as the Turks had assembled 8,000 men which began to move towards him. Skanderbeg slowly retired, while Moiseguillamai and Tanush broke into the camp. The Turkish force sent against Skanderbeg was lured towards the foothills and the next morning, July 25, they were surrounded and completely destroyed. The next day, Skanderbeg was seen above the rocks of Kruje, in conference with Vrana Khanti, surprising Murad. After Vrana had returned to the castle, a pasha was chosen to have a conference with Vrana, bringing him many rich presents. The pasha tried to convince the count that Murad would be a more suitable master than Skanderbeg was, and that the siege was almost over, but Vrana refused to surrender. As a result, a fresh Ottoman assault began. Meanwhile, Murad sent an envoy trying to convince Skanderbeg to capitulate by offering 10,000 crowns annually. Skanderbeg also refused, replying, "Nay, if Murad did divide with me and make me co-partner with all his empire, I would never suffer the name of Albania to be stained and blemished with this blot of disgrace and infamy." The assault continued, and the Albanian positions seemed desperate. On October 14, Skanderbeg offered Kruje to the Venetians, threatening to capitulate the fortress to the Turks if they did not accept it. After Murad lifted the siege on October 26, because of the arriving winter, the Venetians replied to Skanderbeg's offer, rejecting it, and offered to help Skanderbeg to harmonize his relationship with Ottomans. The siege cost the Ottomans 20,000 casualties, and according to Marin Barlatai, Murad II would die in Kruje due to disease, but he would die months later in Edirne. With that out of the way, we will see you guys in another Illyrian Legacy video.